This is the real story of Robert's Rebellion, the war that ended 300 years of dragon rule and planted the seeds for everything you see in Game of Thrones. Every battle, every betrayal, every secret, from Summerhall's ashes to the Tower of Joy. If you love deep Game of Thrones lore, subscribe and leave a like. This is going to be a long, detailed journey. Tonight, we uncover what destroyed the last dragons and the quiet promise that changed the realm forever. Our story begins not with a battle, but with a king imprisoned in darkness and the madness that followed. To understand the Mad King, we must first understand the man he was before the madness took him. Rhaegar Targaryen, second of his name, did not start as a monster. In his youth, he was considered handsome, charming even. He loved tournaments and songs. He dreamed of great things. When he took the throne, the realm had hope. His best friend Tywin Lannister became his hand. Together they would rule wisely, people said. Together they would bring a golden age. But something went wrong. Perhaps it was always there, sleeping in his blood, waiting. Perhaps it was the weight of the crown, or perhaps it was Duskendale, the place where Rhaegar Targaryen the man died, and the Mad King was born. The year was 277, 6 years before the rebellion. Lord Dennis Darklyn ruled the town of Duskendale in the Crownlands, not far from King's Landing. He was a small lord with small ambitions that grew too large. His wife, Lady Sarala, whispered in his ear. She came from Myr across the narrow sea, and she knew how to make a man believe he deserved more than he had. Duskendale wanted freedoms, special rights, lower taxes. The crown said no. Tywin Lannister, as hand, was firm. The law was the law. But Aerys, ever impulsive, decided to visit Duskendale personally. He would charm Lord Darklyn. He would make the man see reason. Tywin advised against it. The king went anyway, taking only a small guard. It was a mistake that would haunt the realm for years to come. Lord Darklyn did not bow when the king arrived. Instead, he shut the gates. He took Aerys prisoner. It was called the Defiance of Duskendale, and it shocked the Seven Kingdoms. No one had dared lay hands on a Targaryen king in living memory. But Darklyn had done it, and now he held the king in the dungeons of the Dun Fort, making demands. Tywin Lannister brought an army to the walls of Duskendale. He surrounded the town and waited. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Aerys was held in a dark cell, alone with his fear. He heard the sounds of the siege above. He did not know if his hand would save him or let him rot. In the darkness, Aerys began to believe everyone had betrayed him. His mind started to crack. For half a year, the king sat in that cell. His hair grew long. His nails grew long. He refused to let anyone near him with a blade after that, even to trim his hair or cut his nails. The darkness changed him. He began to see enemies everywhere, even in his own friends. Tywin waited outside with the army, calculating. Some say Tywin considered letting Aerys die so that Rhaegar, still a boy, would take the throne with Tywin as regent. We will never know the truth. But before Tywin could make that choice, someone else acted. Sir Barristan Selmy, the finest knight in the realm, volunteered for a desperate mission. He would sneak into Duskendale alone, find the king, and bring him out. It was madness. It was suicide. Tywin gave him permission anyway. Barristan went in at dawn, disguised as a peasant. He slipped through the siege lines, over the walls, into the castle. He killed the guards silently, one by one. He found the king's cell and broke the lock. Aerys was a shadow of himself, thin and wild-eyed, but he recognized Barristan. They fought their way out together, Barristan's sword flashing in the dim light, the king stumbling behind him. When they emerged from Duskendale, Tywin's forces stormed the town. Lord Darklyn was captured. His wife was captured. Aerys demanded their deaths, and he did not want them quick. Lord Darklyn was beheaded. Lady Sarala was tortured and killed slowly. The Darklyn line was ended. The town was punished. And Aerys returned to King's Landing, convinced that everyone was plotting against him. The man who entered Duskendale never truly came back out. After Duskendale, Aerys changed. He grew paranoid. He trusted no one, not even Tywin, the man who had served him for years. He began to suspect his hand of treason, of wanting the throne for himself. He started keeping his distance, listening to other voices, crueler voices. His relationship with Queen Rhaella, his own sister and wife, grew colder and more violent. He hurt her in ways the court pretended not to see. The servants heard her cries and said nothing. The king's guard stood outside the door and did nothing. Aerys was the king. No one could stop him. And slowly, the madness that began in that dark cell at Duskendale spread like poison through his mind. He started to love fire. He loved watching men burn. He called it justice. He called it cleansing. And the realm began to fear him. The king who came back from Duskendale was not the king who left, and the realm would pay the price. But while Aerys descended into madness, his son gave the kingdom hope. To understand why the dragons fell, we must first understand how they tried to return. The year was 259, 18 years before Duskendale, decades before Robert ever raised his warhammer. King Aegon V sat the Iron Throne, a good man who loved the common people. History would call him Aegon the Unlikely, for he had never expected to be king, but there he was, wearing a crown and carrying a weight that grew heavier with each passing year. The Targaryen dragons had been gone for more than a century. The last one, a stunted creature no bigger than a cat, had died during the reign of Aegon III. Without dragons, the Targaryens were still royalty, still powerful, still seated on a throne made of their ancestors' conquest. But they were not what they had been, and Aegon V knew it. The king grew old. His children married into great houses. His grandchildren were beautiful and proud. But Aegon had read the old prophecies, the whispers passed down through Targaryen blood, a prince that was promised, a song of ice and fire. He believed the dragons must return. He believed it with the kind of faith that bends reason. So he gathered his wisest men, his most loyal friends, and his family to a place called Summerhall. It was a palace in the Dornish marches, a summer retreat filled with light and warmth. There, Aegon would attempt the impossible. He would bring dragons back into the world. He invited pyromancers and sorcerers. He brought dragon eggs that had turned to stone over the long years. He prepared rituals drawn from ancient texts, and he truly believed it would work. No one knows exactly what happened inside Summerhall that day. The records are ash. The witnesses are dead, but we know this. Aegon tried. He used wildfire, ancient spells, blood magic perhaps. He wanted fire and life and the return of everything the Targaryens had lost. And the fire came. Oh, the fire came. It rose fast, faster than anyone expected. The flames spread through the halls like living things, hungry and wild and impossible to stop. The king's son, Prince Duncan the Small, tried to save his father. He was called Duncan the Small, not because he was weak, but because he had given up his crown to marry for love. He ran into the fire and never came out. Sir Duncan the Tall, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and Aegon's oldest friend, a man who had protected Aegon since they were both young, went in after them. He did not return either. The flames took them, one by one. They faded into the heat. The screams were brief. The silence that followed was long. The palace burned for hours. People ran from the flames, carrying whatever they could save. Servants died. Guards died. The great lords who had come to witness Aegon's triumph died. Summerhall, the beautiful summer palace, became a tomb. But in that same moment, as the palace burned and the Targaryen line seemed ready to end in ash and ruin, a child was born. Princess Rhaegar, Aegon's granddaughter and the wife of Prince Aerys, went into labor as the fires raged around her. She delivered a son in a room thick with smoke and the smell of burning wood. The midwives worked by firelight, the heat unbearable, the screams of the dying echoing through the halls. But the baby came. The baby cried. The mother lived. And when they carried the child out into the open air, away from the ruins, they said he had been born amidst salt and smoke, just as the old prophecy foretold. They named him Rhaegar Targaryen, the prince who would carry the weight of his family's hope and their ghosts. From his first breath, he was touched by tragedy. Summerhall had killed a king in his dreams, but it had also given the realm a boy who many believed would be the one to save it. The prophecy spoke of a prince that was promised, a hero who would come in darkness to defend the living. Rhaegar was born in fire and death. Surely, people whispered, he was that prince. Surely the gods had a plan. The maesters recorded the date carefully. The singers made songs. And baby Rhaegar, wrapped in cloth and carried away from the burning palace, became the hope of a dying dynasty. Rhaegar grew up beautiful. Silver hair that caught the light like molten platinum. Eyes the color of deep violet, almost purple in certain shadows. A face that could have been carved by artists, delicate and strong at once. He learned to fight, to read, to lead. He was everything a prince should be. Kind to the small folk, graceful with a sword, thoughtful in his counsel. Knights sought his favor. Ladies dreamed of his attention. The common people loved him in a way they had never loved his father. Rhaegar was the golden prince, the promise of a better future. But those who knew him well saw something else beneath the beauty. A sadness, a distance, a weight he carried that no one else could see. Rhaegar would visit the ruins of Summerhall, walking among the blackened stones, and whispering to ghosts no one else could hear. He read the old texts, the prophecies, the songs of doom and destiny. He played his harp by the hour, and his songs were never joyful. They were always about loss, about sorrow, about the end of things. Some said he was born with a darkness in him, a shadow cast by the fire that should have taken his life before it even began. Others said he simply understood something the rest of the world did not, that he could see the future in his dreams, and it terrified him. Rhaegar spoke of the prince that was promised. He spoke of a great danger coming from the far north, beyond the wall, a cold that would consume the world if someone did not stop it. He believed he had a role to play in the great song, the song of ice and fire. His maester said he was melancholy. His father, King Aerys, said he was weak, too soft, too much like a maester, and not enough like a warrior. But Rhaegar pressed on, reading, searching, waiting for signs. He believed destiny had marked him. He believed the old words, a bleeding star, salt and smoke, born to wake dragons from stone. He was born between salt and smoke. Many believed he was the one. But prophecy is a tricky thing. It bends, it lies, and it demands a price no one expects to pay. The boy who survived Summerhall grew into a man who could not escape it. By the time he reached manhood, Rhaegar was already a legend. Songs were sung about him. Tournaments cheered him. The realm watched him with a mixture of awe and expectation. And when it came time for him to marry, the choice carried weight. Politics demanded an alliance. Prophecy demanded an heir, and Rhaegar needed both. The boy who survived Summerhall grew up haunted by fire and destiny, and one day, he would marry a princess from the sun and sand, a choice that should have brought peace, but instead planted the seeds of heartbreak. The marriage was arranged with care. Prince Rhaegar would wed Elia Martell, the daughter of the ruling princess of Dorne. Dorne was proud, ancient, different from the rest of Westeros. They had resisted the Targaryens for generations during the conquest, and only joined the Seven Kingdoms through marriage, not force. An alliance with Dorne meant stability in the south. It meant the loyalty of a powerful region, and it meant Rhaegar would have a beautiful, intelligent wife from a noble line. On the surface, it was perfect. Elia Martell arrived in King's Landing for the wedding, and the city bloomed with celebration. She was lovely, not in the bold, striking way of some southern beauties, but in a gentle way. Dark eyes, warm smile, a kindness that showed in how she spoke to servants and ladies alike. She had been raised in the water gardens of Dorne, a place where princes and peasant children played together without distinction. She believed in equality, in compassion, in the best parts of her people's culture. The wedding was grand. Banners flew. Wine flowed. The High Septon performed the ceremony in the Great Sept of Baelor, and all the realm watched as Rhaegar placed the cloak of House Targaryen over Elia's shoulders. She became a princess of the blood. She became his wife. And for a time, it seemed like it would work. Rhaegar was courteous to her, even affectionate in public. Elia adored him, or tried to. She understood the duty of marriage. She understood that love was something that could grow over time, if both people worked at it. They tried, they truly did. But there was always something missing, something Elia could feel, but could not name. Rhaegar was kind to her, but distant. He would sit beside her at feasts and say the right words, but his mind was elsewhere. He spent his nights reading in the library or playing his harp alone. He spoke of prophecies and ancient songs, and Elia, sweet and patient, tried to understand. She gave him a daughter first, Rhaenys, born with dark Dornish hair and her mother's gentle eyes. Rhaegar loved his daughter in his way, but the realm needed a son. Prophecy needed a son. Elia tried again, and the pregnancy was difficult. She was not strong. The maesters said her body was delicate. That childbirth took a heavy toll, but she carried the baby to term and delivered a son. Aegon, they named him, after the conqueror, a strong Targaryen name. The realm celebrated. Rhaegar had his heir. The line was secure. But the birth nearly killed Elia. She bled for days. The maesters worked tirelessly to save her, and they did, but barely. When it was over, they delivered their verdict with grave faces. Princess Elia could have no more children. Another pregnancy would kill her. The line ended at 2. Rhaegar had a daughter and a son. It should have been enough. For most men, it would have been a blessing, but Rhaegar was not most men. He believed in the prophecy. He believed the dragon must have 3 heads, that the prince that was promised would need 3 children to fulfill the ancient song. Elia could give him no more. The maesters were certain, and something shifted in Rhaegar. He grew more distant. He spent more time in the library, poring over scrolls and ancient texts. He played his harp in the Godswood at night, the notes drifting through the red keep like ghosts. Elia tried to reach him, but he was slipping away into his own mind, into visions and fears she could not follow. She loved him, or wanted to. She was loyal. She raised their children with care. She attended feasts and fulfilled her duties as princess. But she knew her husband's heart was not fully hers. She knew he looked at her, and saw an obstacle to something greater, something she could never give him. Dawn loved Elia. Her brother, Prince Oberyn, was fiercely protective of her. Her other brother, Prince Doran, the ruling prince, watched the marriage carefully, aware that his sister was vulnerable so far from home. The Martells had given the crown their daughter, their alliance, their trust, and in return, they expected honor. They expected Elia to be treated as a queen should be treated, with respect and care. For years, it seemed fine. Rhaegar was never cruel. He never raised his voice or his hand, but the distance grew. And when the tourney at Harrenhal came, Elia sat in the stands beside her daughter, smiling as her husband rode in the lists, never imagining that in a few short hours, her world would shatter. The marriage should have been the foundation of peace. Instead, it became a wound that would never heal. It was meant to be the grandest celebration in living memory. Instead, it became the spark, the tourney at Harrenhal. Even the name carried weight. Harrenhal was a cursed place, a massive castle built by King Harren the Black, who dreamed of creating the greatest fortress in Westeros. He built it tall and strong, with walls so thick no army could breach them. But on the day he finished, Aegon the Conqueror arrived with his dragons. The dragons did not need to breach the walls. They simply flew over them and burned everything inside. Harren and all his sons died screaming. The castle stood, but it was hollow, broken, cursed. Every house that held it since had fallen to ruin, but Lord Walter Went, who held it in the year 281, wanted to host something spectacular anyway. He announced a tourney unlike any Westeros had ever seen. The prize purses were enormous, 40,000 gold dragons for the champion. A fortune. Knights came from every corner of the realm. Lords brought their families. Even the king came, though no one expected it. The year of the false spring, they called it. Winter had gripped the realm for years, and then suddenly the snows melted early. Flowers bloomed, the sun was warm, the whole realm seemed to exhale, as if the gods themselves were celebrating. It felt like a new beginning. Everyone came to Harrenhal. Robert Baratheon came, young and strong and handsome, already betrothed to Lyanna Stark. He laughed loud and drank deep, and boasted about the sons he would have with his wolf girl. Eddard Stark came with his father and sister, quiet and watchful as always. Brandon Stark, the eldest, came full of fire and confidence. Lyanna Stark came, though she did not want to marry Robert. She saw through his charm, saw the way he looked at other women, heard the stories of his bastards, but she was dutiful. She would marry him if her father commanded it. For now, she was still free. Prince Rhaegar came with his wife and children. Elia Martell sat in the high seats, her daughter Rhaenys on her lap, watching her husband prepare to compete. She wore Dornish silks and smiled gently at the crowd. She was proud of Rhaegar, even if she did not fully understand him. Jaime Lannister was there too, freshly named to the Kingsguard, standing in his white cloak and golden armor, conflicted about the honor that had stolen his future. His father, Tywin Lannister, was absent. Tywin had resigned as Hand after Aerys humiliated him by taking Jaime. He stayed at Casterly Rock, silent with rage, but the realm barely noticed. Everyone was focused on the tournament, the knights, the glory. The lists were the finest ever built. The pavilions stretched for miles. The banners of every great house snapped in the wind. It was meant to be perfect. It was meant to be a celebration of peace and unity. Instead, it became the moment everything began to unravel. The tournament began with all the color and noise you would expect. Knights in shining armor charged at each other with lances, the wood splintering on impact, the crowd roaring with approval. Horses thundered across the field. Banners rose and fell. Men were unhorsed, dragged from the lists, their pride bruised but their bodies mostly intact. It was glorious and loud, and exactly what the realm needed. But then something strange happened. A mystery knight appeared, fought for honor, then vanished. Some say it was a northern girl in armor. This mystery knight was smaller than most, slight of build, and wore armor that did not match. The shield was painted with a laughing weirwood tree, a heart tree like the ones in the Godswoods of the north. The mystery knight entered the lists and challenged 3 knights, one after another. These 3 had mistreated a smaller man, a Crannog man named Howland Reed, mocking him and beating him for sport. The mystery knight defeated all 3. The lances struck true, the knights fell, and then, before anyone could demand the mystery knight reveal their identity, the figure vanished, rode away into the crowd and disappeared. The realm buzzed with questions. Who was it? Why did they fight only those 3? And then leave? King Aerys, paranoid as always, saw conspiracy. He commanded his son to find the mystery knight and unmask them. It could be a plot, he said. It could be an assassin. Rhaegar rode out with a small group of men, searching the camps and pavilions. He came back hours later, empty-handed, or so he claimed. But those who watched closely said Rhaegar smiled when he returned, a small, secret smile, like he knew something the rest of the world did not. Many believe now that Rhaegar found the mystery knight. Many believe it was Lyanna Stark in that armor, fighting for the honor of Howland Reed, who had befriended her, and many believe Rhaegar chose to protect her secret. If true, it was the first bond between them, a secret shared, a moment of understanding, and it would change everything. King Aerys arrived at Harrenhal himself, though he had not left the Red Keep in years. His hand, Tywin Lannister. No, wait, Tywin had resigned. The king had no hand now. Aerys came anyway, his paranoia driving him. His hair was long and filthy. His nails were twisted and yellow. He looked like a corpse wearing a crown. People whispered when they saw him. This was their king, this mad, wild-eyed creature. Aerys thought Rhaegar was plotting against him. He thought the tournament was a cover for a council where the lords would proclaim Rhaegar king. He thought everyone was his enemy. So he came to Harrenhal to assert his power, to remind the realm that he was still king. And he made a decision that shocked everyone. He named Jaime Lannister to the Kingsguard. It was meant to be an honor, the highest honor a knight could receive, but everyone understood the truth. By making Jaime a knight sworn to celibacy and lifelong service, Aerys robbed Tywin of his heir. Cersei, Jaime's twin sister, was just a girl, and daughters could not inherit Casterly Rock by tradition. Aerys had effectively ended Tywin's line, or crippled it. It was revenge, petty and cruel, for all the years Tywin had overshadowed him as Hand. Tywin said nothing. He simply left Harrenhal, returned to Casterly Rock, and closed his gates. The richest, most powerful lord in Westeros withdrew from the realm, and Aerys laughed. But the true moment, the one that mattered most, came at the end of the tournament. Rhaegar won. He rode through the final tilts with precision and grace, his lance striking true, his seat on the horse perfect. He defeated knight after knight, rising through the brackets. In the final tilt, he faced Sir Barristan Selmy, one of the finest knights in the realm, a man who had saved King Aerys from Duskendale. The crowd watched breathless as the two rode at each other. Rhaegar's lance struck Barristan's shield at the perfect angle, lifting him from his saddle. Barristan fell. Rhaegar won. The crowd roared. The prince was champion. He rode a circuit of the field, accepting the cheers, and then he was given the champion's crown. It was a wreath of winter roses, pale blue and lovely, their scent sweet and cold, like the breath of the north. Tradition was clear. The champion would ride to the stands and crown a woman the queen of love and beauty. It was symbolic, romantic, meaningless in any real sense. Everyone expected him to crown his wife. Elia sat in the high seats, her daughter on her lap, smiling gently. She was ready to receive the honor. Robert Baratheon expected him to crown Elia too, because any other choice would be madness. But Rhaegar did not ride to his wife. He rode past her. The crowd's cheers faded into confused murmurs. Rhaegar kept riding, his horse moving slowly along the stands. He stopped in front of Lyanna Stark. She was 15, beautiful in a wild northern way, with long dark hair and grey eyes that missed nothing. She sat beside her brothers, not expecting anything, not prepared. Rhaegar lowered his lance. He lifted the crown of winter roses, and he placed it gently in her lap. The silence that followed was louder than any cheer. You could hear the wind. You could hear the banners snapping. Lyanna's face went pale, then red. She did not know where to look. Elia Martell's smile faded like a candle blown out. Her hands tightened on her daughter. Robert Baratheon stood, his face darkening with fury. His fists clenched so hard his knuckles went white. Brandon Stark, Lyanna's older brother, put a hand on Robert's shoulder to hold him back, whispering urgently. But the damage was done. Rhaegar had humiliated his wife in front of the entire realm. He had insulted the Baratheon-Stark alliance. He had broken every rule of courtesy and honor. And he had done it in front of thousands of witnesses, including his own father, the Mad King, who watched with narrowed eyes and said nothing. When Rhaegar placed those winter roses in Lyanna's lap, he sealed the fate of thousands. But was it love or something stranger? The realm exploded with gossip. Why would a prince, married with children, crown a northern girl he barely knew? Was he infatuated? Was it lust? Was it prophecy? Some said Rhaegar had heard a voice, a vision, that told him Lyanna was the one he needed, that the dragon must have 3 heads, and Elia could give him only 2. Some said he simply fell for Lyanna's beauty and her spirit, the way she rode horses like the wind, and did not care for courtly games. Some said it was politics, a ploy to bind the North to his cause when he eventually moved against his father. And some said it was none of those things, that it was simply a moment of recklessness from a man who had spent his whole life trying to be perfect. We will never know the truth. Rhaegar is dead, and he took his reasons with him. Lyanna is dead, and she never spoke of it to anyone who lived to tell the tale. But the roses were given, the realm held its breath, and within a year, the first blood would be spilled. Lyanna returned to Winterfell with her father and brothers. She did not speak of the roses. She did not speak of Rhaegar, but she carried the memory like a brand. Robert fumed and drank and swore he would kill the Dragon Prince if he ever dared insult him again. Elia returned to King's Landing with her children, her heart broken in a quiet way that no one acknowledged. And Rhaegar rode away from Harrenhal, his mind full of prophecies and choices he had not yet made. The tourney ended. The lords went home. The false spring faded, and winter returned. And in the shadows, the pieces were already moving toward war. The roses were given. The realm held its breath. And within a year, the first blood would be spilled. News travelled north. Lyanna had vanished with the Dragon Prince. Her brother rode to King's Landing, demanding answers. It happened months after Harrenhal. The realm had settled into an uneasy quiet. Robert and Lyanna's wedding was being planned. Brandon Stark was riding south to Riverrun to marry Catelyn Tully, cementing an alliance between the North and the Riverlands. Everything seemed to be moving forward, but then Lyanna disappeared. She was travelling through the Riverlands with a small escort when it happened. One day she was there, laughing with her guards, riding her horse. The next, she was gone. No one saw her taken. No one heard her scream. The guards said they were ambushed, overwhelmed, and when they woke, the Lady Lyanna was missing. And the word that spread through the realm was this: Prince Rhaegar Targaryen had taken her. Some said he kidnapped her, stole her in the night like a common brigand. Some said she went willingly, that she ran to him because she loved him. The truth, like so many truths in this story, is lost to time and silence. But what mattered was the story people believed. And Brandon Stark believed his sister had been stolen. He believed Rhaegar had dishonored her, harmed her, held her against her will. Brandon was not a man to sit still when his blood was threatened. He was wild, fierce, quick to anger, a true wolf. He had been on his way to Riverrun to marry Catelyn Tully when the news reached him. A rider came hard and fast, delivering the message. Lyanna was gone. Rhaegar had her. Brandon did not continue to his wedding. He did not send a raven to his father. He did not stop to think. He turned his horse south toward King's Landing and kicked it into a gallop. He took his companions with him: Ethan Glover, his loyal squire; Geoffrey Mallister, heir to Seaguard; Kyle Royce, heir to Runestone; and Elbert Arryn, nephew and heir to Jon Arryn, Lord of the Vale. 4 young men from powerful houses, loyal men, brave men, doomed men. Brandon arrived at the gates of the Red Keep and did something unforgivable. He shouted for Rhaegar. He called the prince's name like a curse. He screamed that Rhaegar should come out and face him, that he should come and die for what he had done. It was not a request. It was not a formal challenge. It was a roar of fury thrown at the gates of the king's own castle, in front of guards and courtiers and anyone within earshot. In another time, it might have been dealt with as simple hot-headed words from a worried brother. A wiser king might have calmed him, explained, sent him home with assurances. But Aerys Targaryen was not wise, and Rhaegar was not there. The prince had already left the city with Lyanna, vanished to some unknown place in the south. Only King Aerys was there, sitting on the Iron Throne, listening to reports of this northern boy screaming for his son's blood. The king's laughter echoed through the throne room as the flames rose higher. Aerys did not see a brother defending his sister. He saw treason. He saw a plot. He saw the thing his broken mind always saw: enemies everywhere, knives in the dark, rebellion hiding behind every word. Aerys ordered Brandon arrested. He ordered all of Brandon's companions arrested. They were dragged into the dungeons, still shouting, still demanding justice. And then Aerys sent word to Lord Rickard Stark, Brandon's father and warden of the North. "Your son has committed treason," the message said. "Come to King's Landing and answer for his crimes." Rickard Stark received the summons in Winterfell. He was an honourable man, a lord who believed in justice and the king's law. He thought there would be a trial, a chance to speak, a chance to explain that his son's words were rash but not treason. He thought Aerys, for all his strangeness, would still follow the old customs. He was wrong. Rickard gathered a small party of northern lords and rode south. He arrived at King's Landing and demanded to see his son. He demanded a fair hearing, and Aerys gave him one. "A trial by combat," the king said. "You have the right to defend yourself. Choose your champion." Rickard Stark chose himself. It was his right as an accused nobleman to fight for his own innocence. But Aerys smiled when he said it. The king chose his champion too. He chose fire. They brought Lord Rhaegar Stark to the throne room, and they suspended him from the rafters by a chain. They dressed him in his armor, full plate, the wolf of House Stark engraved on the breastplate. Then they built a pyre beneath him, not a quick fire, a slow one. They used logs and coal, building the heat gradually. The metal armor became an oven. The heat rose. Rhaegar Stark began to cook inside his own armor. The smell filled the throne room. The courtiers stood frozen, unable to look away, unable to stop it. This was the king's justice. This was the trial. And then they brought Brandon in to watch. They put a leather cord around Brandon's neck and tied the other end to a wooden beam. They placed a longsword on the floor, just out of reach. If he could reach the sword, he could cut his father down. If he could stretch far enough, he could save him. So Brandon tried. He lunged forward, his arms straining, his fingers grasping for the hilt. But every movement pulled the cord tighter around his throat. The more he struggled to save his father, the less he could breathe. He fought anyway. He pulled and reached and gasped, his face turning red, then purple. He fought until his strength left him. He fought until the light left his eyes. And when it was over, Lord Rhaegar Stark was ash inside his armor, and Brandon Stark lay still on the floor, the sword still inches from his fingertips. 2 more Starks were gone, and the wolf would not forget. The throne room was silent. The smell of burned flesh hung in the air. Aerys sat on the Iron Throne, his eyes wide and bright, his mouth twisted into something like a smile. He looked at the bodies and felt powerful. He felt like he had won. Then he gave another order, one that would tip the realm into war. He sent word to Jon Arryn, Lord of the Vale. Jon Arryn had fostered 2 boys as his wards, Eddard Stark, now the Lord of Winterfell after his father and brother's deaths, and Robert Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End. Both were at the Eyrie, in Jon's care, almost like sons to him. Aerys's command was simple and impossible. Send me their heads. Deliver Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon to King's Landing so they can answer for the crimes of House Stark, so they can die like the traitor Brandon died. Jon Arryn received the order and stood in his hall for a long time, staring at the words. He was an old man, cautious and deliberate, not prone to rash decisions. He had served the crown faithfully his whole life. He had fought in wars for the Targaryens. He had bent the knee and kept the peace. But he looked at the 2 young men in his hall, boys he had raised from children, boys he had taught to ride and fight and lead, and he could not do it. He could not hand them over to a mad king who would murder them for no crime other than being born into the wrong house at the wrong time. He thought of Rickard burning. He thought of Brandon choking, and he made his choice. Jon Arryn called his banners. He sent ravens to the Lords of the Vale, summoning them to the Eyrie. He declared that he would not obey the king's command. He declared rebellion. It was the first time in nearly 300 years that a great lord had openly defied the Iron Throne, and the realm would never be the same. Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon stood beside him. Ned, quiet and grieving, barely able to process that his father and brother were dead. Robert, furious and burning with a rage that would carry him through years of war. They swore oaths to each other, the 3 of them. They would stand together, they would fight together, and they would end the reign of the Mad King, no matter the cost. The Stark wolves were slain by dragonfire, and in the Vale, a second father chose love over duty. The rebellion had begun. The realm split. Some lords declared for the rebellion. The North followed Ned Stark without question. The Vale followed Jon Arryn. The Stormlands, Robert's own region, were divided, but many followed their young lord. Hoster Tully of the Riverlands joined when Jon Arryn agreed to marry his daughter Lysa, and when Ned agreed to marry his other daughter Catelyn in place of Brandon. Alliances were sealed with betrothals, as they always were. The rebels gathered their strength, and the king gathered his. Aerys commanded his bannermen to crush the rebellion. The Reach, the wealthiest region in Westeros, stayed loyal under Lord Mace Tyrell. The Crownlands remained with the king. Dorne, furious over Rhaegar's treatment of Elia, but still bound by marriage, sent some forces, but held back their full strength. And Tywin Lannister, the richest and most powerful lord in the realm, stayed silent. He had resigned as Hand. He had been humiliated. He sat in Casterly Rock and watched, waiting to see which side would win before he chose. The sides were drawn. The armies began to march. And Robert Baratheon, barely 20 years old, found himself leading a war to overthrow a dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries. He did not want a crown. He wanted Lyanna. He wanted revenge. And he would burn the realm down to get both. Robert was alone, bleeding. with a royalist army tearing the town apart searching for him. The early days of the war were chaos and fury. Robert Baratheon fought like a man possessed. He was not fighting for a throne or a crown or even justice. He was fighting for Lyanna. In his mind, she was a prisoner, stolen by the Dragon Prince, waiting to be saved. Every battle he fought with her name on his lips. Every man he killed imagining it was Rhaegar. His warhammer became legendary. It was massive, a brutal weapon forged specifically for him, designed to shatter armor and bone. Most men could not even lift it. Robert swung it with a strength that seemed impossible, that seemed more myth than reality. He killed loyalist lords in single combat. He scattered whole formations of soldiers. He inspired loyalty in a way few men ever could. People followed Robert because he laughed when he fought, because he drank and sang, and clapped men on the back like they were brothers. He made them feel like they were part of something great, something worth dying for. But being a great warrior does not make you invincible, and Robert learned that the hard way. The Battle of Stony Sept. It would be remembered as one of the turning points of the war, the moment when Robert should have died, but didn't. The town of Stony Sept sat in the Riverlands, a place of narrow streets and old stone buildings and bells. So many bells. Every sept, every tower had them. The town rang with their sound on holy days, a chorus of bronze and iron. Robert had taken his forces there to regroup after a series of brutal skirmishes. He was wounded, a deep cut across his ribs, from a sword that had gotten past his guard in the last fight. He needed rest. He needed a maester to stitch the wound. He needed time for his forces to gather and plan the next move, but he did not get it. Lord Jon Connington, the new hand of the king and one of Aerys's most loyal commanders, received word that Robert was in Stony Sept, and Connington marched his army there with one goal: capture or kill the Baratheon lord and end the rebellion in a single stroke. Connington surrounded the town with thousands of men. He sealed every gate, every road, every path in or out. Then he sent his soldiers into the streets with orders to search every house, every shop, every cellar. Find Robert Baratheon. Drag him out. Kill anyone who stands in the way. The soldiers obeyed. They kicked in doors. They pulled people into the streets and demanded to know where the rebel was hiding. They threatened families. They burned homes of those who refused to talk. The search went on for hours, then a full day, then another. The town became a nightmare of fear and violence. But the people of Stony Sept did not give Robert up. They hid him in cellars and attics. They moved him from house to house, one step ahead of Connington's men. They lied to soldiers who could have killed them for it. They protected a man who was not their lord, who owed them nothing. Why? Robert had done nothing for these people. He was a stranger, a rebel, a man on the run, but there was something about him. Maybe it was his reputation, the stories of his strength and his laughter. Maybe it was the way he had thanked an old woman who gave him bread, or the way he smiled at the children who peeked at him from doorways. Maybe they simply hated the Targaryens and saw a chance to strike back in their own small way. Or maybe, as the singers would later say, it was fate. The gods wanted Robert to live, and so the small folk became his shield. Whatever the reason, they kept him hidden. And while they did, a plan formed. Messages were smuggled out of the town. Ravens flew north. Eddard Stark received word that Robert was trapped. Jon Arryn received word. Hoster Tully received word. And they all marched, as fast as their armies could move, racing to save the man who would be king. The bells began to ring, not in celebration, but in warning. The rebels had come. It was early morning when the first bells started. A single toll from the sept on the hill, deep and resonant. Then another bell answered from across town. Then another. Soon every bell in Stony Sept was ringing, a cascading wave of sound that echoed off the stone walls and filled the streets. It was not a call to prayer. It was a warning. The townspeople knew what it meant. The rebel army had arrived. Eddard Stark came from the north with his banners, the direwolf of House Stark flying above pike and sword. Jon Arryn brought the Knights of the Vale, their armor shining, their discipline absolute. Hoster Tully brought the River Lords, men who knew the land and fought with a fierce protectiveness of their home. They converged on Stony Sept from 3 directions and fell on Connington's army like a hammer on an anvil. The battle was not in an open field. It was in the streets, brutal and close. Steel rang off stone. Men shouted and died in alleyways. Horses could barely move in the narrow spaces. Connington's forces were caught off guard, surrounded, outnumbered. They had been hunting Robert for days, exhausted and spread thin. Now they were the ones being hunted. Connington himself fought bravely. He was a good commander, a loyal man, truly devoted to Rhaegar and the crown, but he was overwhelmed. He took a wound to his side, a spear thrust that nearly killed him. His men dragged him from the fight and carried him away as the royalist forces broke and fled. The Battle of the Bells was over. Robert had survived. The rebellion had its champion back. Jon Connington would never forgive himself. He fled into exile. First to the Golden Company across the narrow sea, haunted by what might have been. Some said he loved Rhaegar more than he loved duty, that his hesitation to burn the town and kill everyone in it, including Robert, came from knowing Rhaegar would have hated such cruelty. Some said he was simply outmatched. Either way, he had failed. And Aerys, furious, stripped him of his lands and title and exiled him forever. Jon Connington had failed. And Robert Baratheon, against all odds, lived to fight another day. The Bells had saved him. The common people had saved him. And now, with Ned and Jon and Hoster at his side, Robert was no longer a wounded fugitive. He was a warlord with an army, and he was coming for the crown. Robert was unstoppable, or so it seemed. After the Battle of the Bells, Robert's confidence soared. He had survived an impossible hunt. He had rallied his allies. He had struck a major blow against the crown's best general. The momentum was with the rebels now. Lords who had been on the fence began to declare for Robert. Small folk sang songs about the man with the warhammer who would not die. Robert pressed his advantage. He marched south with his growing forces, determined to strike another blow before the royalists could regroup. His target was the Stormlands, his own homeland, where loyalist lords still held key castles and towns. He wanted to reclaim what was his, and prove to the realm that House Baratheon was not broken. On the way, he came to Summerhall. Yes, the same Summerhall where Rhaegar had been born, where King Aegon V had died trying to hatch dragons. The palace was ruins now, blackened stones and empty halls, a monument to hubris and tragedy. But near those ruins, 3 loyalist lords had gathered their banners, hoping to stop Robert's march south. Lord Grandison, Lord Catherine, Lord Fell. 3 proud lords from the Stormlands who had chosen to stay loyal to the crown. They each commanded a strong force. They coordinated their positions, setting up to bottle Robert in and crush him with superior numbers. It should have worked. Robert was outnumbered. His men were tired from the march. He had no tactical advantage of terrain. But Robert Baratheon was not a man who waited for advantages. He attacked. He divided his forces and struck all 3 lords on the same day, moving between battlefields with a speed that seemed impossible. First, he smashed into Lord Grandison's forces at dawn, his warhammer swinging through their ranks, breaking their line in minutes. Grandison fell back in disarray. Robert did not pursue. He turned his army and marched to meet Lord Catherine by midday. Catherine's men tried to hold a ridge, but Robert charged uphill, roaring, unstoppable, and scattered them. Catherine himself died in the fighting. Robert, blood-soaked and grinning, turned his army one more time. By late afternoon, he met Lord Fell. Fell's forces were the largest, but they had heard what happened to the other 2. Their morale was broken before the fight began. Robert struck them like a thunderstorm, and they broke. Lord Fell surrendered. 3 battles, 3 victories. One day, the realm took notice. Songs were sung in taverns across Westeros about Robert's triumph at Summerhall. They called him the Demon of the Trident, though that title would truly be earned later. They called him the Young Stag. They called him unstoppable, and for a moment, it seemed like they were right. Robert's army swelled with new recruits. Lords who had hesitated now bent the knee. The rebellion had momentum, and Robert rode it like a wave. He marched toward his ultimate goal, Storm's End, his family's seat, which had been under siege since the war began. His youngest brother Stannis held it with a skeleton garrison, starving but unbroken. Robert meant to lift the siege and reclaim his home, but at a place called Ashford, he met a general who could match him, Randyll Tarly. At Ashford, he met a general who could match him, Randyll Tarly. Lord Randyll Tarly of Horn Hill was known as one of the finest commanders in Westeros. He was cold, disciplined, utterly without mercy or hesitation. Where Robert fought with passion and fury, Tarly fought with calculation and patience. He commanded the vanguard of Mace Tyrell's host, the army of the Reach that was loyal to the crown. Mace Tyrell himself was busy besieging Storm's End, but he had sent Tarly north with a strong force to deal with Robert if he tried to break through. When Robert's scouts reported an army at Ashford, Robert did not hesitate. He was riding high on his victories at Summerhall. He believed himself invincible. He marched his forces toward Ashford, eager to add another victory to his legend. Tarly was waiting. He had chosen the ground carefully, positioning his men on high terrain with a river at their backs. He knew Robert's reputation. He knew the man would charge. So, Tarly prepared a trap. The Battle of Ashford began as Robert expected, a direct confrontation, lines of infantry clashing, cavalry on the flanks, but Tarly did not fight the way other lords fought. He did not try to match Robert's ferocity. He absorbed the charge, pulled his lines back in controlled retreats, funneling Robert's men into narrow killing zones where Tarly's archers could do their work. Robert pushed forward anyway, trying to break through by sheer force. He cut down men who stood against him. His warhammer shattered shields and helms, but Tarly's line did not break. And when Robert overextended, Tarly sprung his trap. Fresh reserves came from the flanks, cutting off Robert's vanguard. The rebel forces were surrounded, pressed from three sides. Men fell by the dozens. The ground turned to mud and blood. Robert fought like a demon, but even he could not win a battle already lost by tactics. He sounded the retreat. The defeat was not total. Robert's forces pulled back in decent order, and Robert himself escaped unharmed, though many of his men did not. Tarly did not pursue aggressively. He had made his point. Robert Baratheon was not invincible. The reach was not to be trifled with. The loss stung Robert deeply. It was his first real defeat, and it reminded him that war was not just about strength and courage. It was about strategy, patience, and knowing when you were beaten. Robert pulled his army back north, regrouping with Ned and the other rebel lords. He sent ravens calling for more support, more men, more supplies, and he turned his eyes toward the real battle, the one that would decide the war, the Trident. Sooner or later, Rhaegar would have to fight, and when he did, Robert would be ready. While Robert licked his wounds and planned his next move, his youngest brother held a castle under siege, starving but refusing to break. Stannis Baratheon was young then, probably 16 or 17, but already he had the iron will that would define him for the rest of his life. When Robert declared rebellion and left Storm's End to march north, he left Stannis in command of the castle with orders to hold it, no matter what. Stannis nodded and obeyed. He always obeyed. Mace Tyrell, Lord of Highgarden and Warden of the South, arrived soon after, with the full might of the Reach. Tens of thousands of men surrounded Storm's End, cutting off every road, every supply line, every fishing boat. The siege began. Mace could have tried to storm the castle, but Storm's End was too strong. Its walls were thick as mountains, built by the first Storm Kings with magic, some said, designed to withstand hurricanes and dragon fire. No, Mace decided to starve them out. It would take time, but it was the smart play. Let the rebels inside eat their stores, and then eat each other. Eventually, they would have no choice but to surrender or die. But Stannis did not surrender. Months passed. The food ran out. The people inside Storm's End began to starve. They ate the horses first, butchering them one by one until the stables were empty. Then they ate the leather, boots, belts, saddles, boiled until soft and chewed into pulp. Then they ate the rats that scurried through the walls. Children cried from hunger. Old men lay down and did not get up. The garrison grew weaker, thinner, hollow-eyed and shaking, but Stannis held the walls. He enforced discipline with an iron hand. He rationed what little they had. He executed one man who tried to steal food from the stores. He did not flinch. He did not apologize. This was his duty. His brother had told him to hold Storm's End, and so he would hold it until he died or the war ended. His men respected him for it, even as they hated him. Stannis never asked them to do anything he was not willing to do himself. He starved alongside them. He stood on the walls in the rain. He never complained. One night, when things were at their darkest, when men were beginning to whisper about surrender, a small ship slipped through the red wine blockade in the bay. It was piloted by a smuggler named Davos Seaworth, a man who knew every cove and current along the coast. Davos had been hired, or perhaps simply moved by the stories of the starving garrison, to bring supplies. He carried onions and saltfish in his little ship, and he sailed under the cover of darkness, past the great warships of the Reach, and brought his cargo into Storm's End. It was not much. A few sacks of onions, some barrels of dried fish, enough to keep 100 men alive for a week, maybe 2, but it was enough. It kept the garrison from complete collapse. It gave them hope. Stannis never forgot that. Years later, when Robert was king and Stannis was a great lord, Stannis would knight Davos Seaworth and make him a lord with lands of his own, but he would also cut off the fingertips of Davos's left hand, one joint from each finger, as punishment for his years of smuggling. Stannis believed in justice, even when it hurt, even when it cost him, especially then. The siege of Storm's End dragged on for nearly a year. Stannis held, his men held, and by the time the war reached its climax, Storm's End still flew the stag of House Baratheon, defiant and unbroken. Bruised but unbroken, Robert marched north. The Trident awaited. Robert had won battles. He had lost a battle, but the war was far from over. In the Stormlands, his youngest brother held a castle under siege, starving but alive. And in King's Landing, a mad king plotted with fire, preparing for the day when the rebels would come for him. Aerys had grown more paranoid with every defeat. The rebellion was closing in. Lords were abandoning him. Even his own son had disappeared with the Stark girl, leaving the realm to burn. Aerys trusted no one except his pyromancers, the men who made wildfire, the green substance that burned hotter and brighter and more hungrily than any natural flame. Wildfire was the Targaryens' secret weapon, their substitute for dragons. It was dangerous, unstable, prone to exploding if handled wrong. But in the right hands, it could destroy armies, castles, entire cities. Aerys ordered the pyromancers to place caches of wildfire throughout King's Landing, beneath the Sept of Baelor, the holiest site in the city, under the Red Keep itself, in the cellars of guild halls and storehouses. Thousands of jars hidden and waiting. If the rebels came for him, Aerys would burn them. He would burn the whole city. He would burn them all. Let Robert come. Let Eddard Stark come. They would find nothing but ash and bones. Aerys whispered his plan to his pyromancers. Burn them all, he said. Burn them in their homes. Burn them in their beds. He said it so often it became a chant, a prayer to the god of fire he had started worshipping in his madness. Burn them all. But before King's Landing could burn, before Robert could reach the capital and claim his throne, the war would be decided elsewhere, on a field beside a river, in a battle that would end a dynasty and begin a new age. 2 men, 1 throne, a river that would run red with the end of everything the dragons had built, the Battle of the Trident. It was the year 283, more than a year since the rebellion began. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen had been absent from the war the entire time. While men died in his name, while his father's kingdom crumbled, Rhaegar stayed hidden with Lyanna Stark in a tower somewhere in Dorne. No one knew exactly where. No one knew what he was doing. Some said he was protecting her. Some said he was performing rituals, trying to fulfill prophecy. Some said he was simply a coward who did not want to fight. But the truth did not matter anymore. The realm was bleeding. The royalists were losing. And even Rhaegar, lost in his dreams and visions, could not ignore reality forever. He rode north. He left Lyanna in the tower with 3 of his best Kingsguard to protect her. He gathered what forces remained loyal to the crown. Men from the Crownlands, survivors from earlier battles, Dornish soldiers sent by House Martell, though their hearts were not in it. Rhaegar took command and marched to meet the rebellion. He sent word ahead, a challenge, though not worded as such. He would meet Robert Baratheon at the Trident. They would end this, one way or another. The war would be decided. The Trident was a wide river in the Riverlands, its waters swift and cold, even in summer. It was a crossing point, a place where armies had met before. Both sides knew the ground. Both sides knew what was at stake. The rebel host gathered on the north bank, Northmen under Eddard Stark, grim and loyal, men of the Vale under Jon Arryn, disciplined and proud, Riverland lords under Hoster Tully, defending their homeland, and the Stormlanders who still followed Robert, hungry for vengeance. It was a massive army, the largest the rebellion had fielded. On the south bank stood the royalists, fewer in number but still dangerous, still led by a prince of the blood. The battle began at dawn. The 2 armies faced each other across the water, banners snapping in the wind, the sound of drums and horns echoing off the hills. Then the order was given. The armies surged forward. Men waded into the Trident, the water up to their waists, their thighs, the current pulling at them. Arrows filled the sky. Spears were thrown. The 2 forces collided in the middle of the river, and the water turned red almost immediately. Men slipped on the stones of the riverbed and were trampled. Horses screamed and fell. It was chaos, as all battles are, a nightmare of steel and blood and screaming. The fighting spread along the river for miles. Separate skirmishes broke out up and down the banks, but through the chaos, one thing became clear. Robert and Rhaegar were searching for each other. Robert fought through the press of bodies, his warhammer swinging, clearing a path. Men fell before him, their armor caved in, their bones shattered. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, driven by months of rage and grief. Rhaegar moved through the royalist ranks with grace and speed, his sword flashing, his black armor catching the light. The rubies on his breastplate gleamed like drops of fire. He was beautiful and doomed, a prince out of legend riding to meet his fate. They found each other in the shallows, the water up to their knees. The armies around them seemed to pause, as if the gods themselves wanted to watch. Rhaegar fought with grace. Robert fought with fury. Only one would leave the water alive. They circled each other, testing, watching. Rhaegar's sword was quick, his movements precise and practiced. He had trained his whole life to be a knight, to be the perfect prince his people needed. He struck at Robert's side, his blade glancing off the thick armor. Robert swung his hammer in a wide arc, forcing Rhaegar back a step. They clashed again and again, the sound of steel on steel ringing out above the noise of battle. Rhaegar was faster, Robert was stronger. Rhaegar aimed for weak points, trying to slip his blade between the plates of armor. Robert simply smashed through Rhaegar's guard with brute force. The warhammer was a blur. It caught Rhaegar's shield and splintered it. It struck his shoulder and made him stumble. And then it came down with all of Robert's strength, all of his rage, all of his grief for a girl he thought he loved. And it struck Rhaegar square in the chest. The blow struck true. Rhaegar's eyes dimmed as he sank beneath the current, his silver hair swirling in the red water. The rubies from his breastplate scattered, bouncing and tumbling along the riverbed, sinking into the mud and stones. They would be found for years afterward, pulled from the water by scavengers and treasure hunters. The place where Rhaegar fell would be called the Ruby Ford forever after, a monument to the moment the dragons truly died. But in that instant, all that mattered was this: the prince was gone. The last hope of the Targaryen dynasty had fallen to a warhammer in the hands of a grieving stag. The royalist army saw their prince fall, and their spirit broke. They began to retreat, pulling back from the water, scattering into the fields beyond. The rebels pursued, cutting them down as they ran. The Battle of the Trident was over. The rebellion had won. Sir Barristan Selmy fought like a lion that day. He was on the royalist side, loyal to the crown he had sworn to serve. He cut through rebel soldiers, trying desperately to reach Rhaegar, trying to protect his prince. But he was too late. Rhaegar was already gone, his body drifting in the current, already part of history. Barristan fought on anyway, out of duty, out of grief, out of the stubborn refusal to surrender that had defined his whole life. He killed men who came at him. He wounded more, but eventually he was surrounded. He took wounds himself, his armor dented, his strength fading. He expected to die. He welcomed it, in a way. But Robert Baratheon saw him fall and gave an order: spare him, bring him to me. Robert's men obeyed, pulling Barristan from the fight, tending to his wounds. Later, when Barristan woke in a rebel camp, Robert came to see him. He offered Barristan a place in his service, a spot in his Kingsguard when he took the throne. Robert respected courage. He respected honor, and Barristan Selmy was the most honorable man in Westeros. Barristan would accept, though he never forgot that he had failed Rhaegar. That failure would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Dragon Prince was gone, but far to the south, in a tower no one spoke of, a woman's screams echoed. The story was not over. Lyanna Stark lay in a bed in the Tower of Joy, her body racked with pain. She was in labor. Rhaegar had left her there with 3 Kingsguard to protect her, promising he would return when the war was over. But he would not return. He was dead in the water of the Trident, his dreams of prophecy and 3-headed dragons dead with him. And Lyanna, alone except for the silent guards outside and the midwives inside, gave birth to a son. The baby cried. Lyanna held him for a moment, her strength failing, her vision blurring. She named him in her mind, though she would never speak the name aloud, except to her brother when he came. The rebellion had won the battle, but the secrets were just beginning. The king had one final command: burn them all. When word reached King's Landing that Rhaegar was dead, that the Battle of the Trident was lost, panic gripped the city like a vice. The Red Keep became a place of frantic whispers and hurried plans. Courtiers packed their belongings, ready to flee. Lesser lords slipped out of the city under cover of darkness, abandoning the king they had sworn to serve. The small folk barred their doors and prayed to the Seven for mercy. Everyone knew the rebels were coming. Everyone knew Robert Baratheon would take the throne, and everyone knew that Aerys Targaryen, the Mad King, would not go quietly. Aerys paced the throne room, his footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. He was gaunt, skeletal, his hair wild and unwashed, hanging in greasy tangles past his shoulders. His nails were long and yellow, curling like claws. His eyes were wide, always wide, seeing things no one else could see. Ghosts, flames, enemies closing in from every shadow. His pyromancers stood nearby, waiting for orders, and Aerys gave the order he had been building toward for months: perhaps years. Burn them, burn the city, burn the traitors when they come. Let them find nothing but ashes. Let them choke on the smoke of their victory. The pyromancers bowed and obeyed. They began moving through the city, visiting the hidden caches of wildfire they had placed on the king's command. They prepared fuses, arranged barrels, set the mechanisms that would turn King's Landing into an inferno. All it would take was a spark, a word, and 500,000 people would burn. The pyromancers worked quickly, efficiently, their hands steady even as their hearts raced. This was the king's will. This was their duty. If the Mad King wanted to burn his own city, then burn it would. But someone else was watching. Jaime Lannister stood in the throne room, his white cloak draped over his golden armor, his sword at his side. He was young, barely 20, the youngest knight ever named to the Kingsguard. He had been so proud when Aerys chose him at Harrenhal, thrilled by the honor, eager to prove himself worthy. But the years since had taught him what it really meant to serve a mad king. He had stood outside the queen's chambers and listened to her scream as Aerys hurt her, and he had done nothing because his vows said he must not interfere. He had watched Aerys burn men alive in the throne room, good men and bad, guilty and innocent, and he had done nothing because his vows said he must obey. He had swallowed his disgust and his rage and told himself that this was duty, that this was honor. But now, standing in the throne room as Aerys gave the order to burn the city, Jaime realized something. Some oaths are not meant to be kept. Some oaths damn you no matter what you do. Jaime stood alone in the throne room. He had sworn an oath, but some oaths damn you either way. Aerys was pacing, muttering to himself, his voice rising and falling in a mad rhythm. Burn them all. Burn them in their homes. Burn them in their beds. The pyromancers had already left to light the caches. In minutes, maybe an hour, the wildfire would ignite. The city would explode. 500,000 people would die. Men, women, children, small folk who had never raised a sword, never sworn a vow, never done anything except live their lives in the shadow of the Red Keep. Babies, old grandmothers, shopkeepers and beggars, and mothers nursing infants. All of them would burn because a mad king would rather destroy his kingdom than let someone else have it. Jaime thought about his vows. Protect the king. Serve the king. Obey the king. Never raise a blade against the king. He thought about his father, Tywin, who was probably already marching on the city with his Lannister host. He thought about his sister, Cersei, somewhere far away, safe. He thought about Barristan Selmy, the perfect knight, the man who had saved Aerys from Duskendale. Would Barristan have obeyed this order? Would he have stood here and let the city burn because his vows demanded it? Jaime made his choice. He drew his sword. The sound of the blade leaving its scabbard echoed in the empty throne room. Aerys heard it and turned, his eyes wide with shock, then rage, then something like understanding. He opened his mouth to scream for his guards, but there were no guards left. They had all fled, or died, or abandoned him. Aerys tried to run. He stumbled toward the Iron Throne, as if sitting on it would protect him, as if the swords of Aegon's enemies could shield him from the sword of his own Kingsguard. But Jaime was faster. He caught Aerys at the base of the throne, and he drove his sword through the king's back. Aerys gasped. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. He fell forward, his body crumpling on the steps, his blood pooling on the cold stone floor. Jaime stood over him, breathing hard, his hands shaking. He had killed a king. He had broken the most sacred vow a knight could make, but the city was still in danger. The pyromancers were still out there, lighting fuses, preparing to ignite the wildfire. Jaime ran. He found the first pyromancer in a cellar near the Sept of Baelor, kneeling beside a barrel of wildfire, torch in hand. Jaime killed him before he could light it. He found the second in a storehouse, arranging jars in a careful pattern. Jaime killed him too. He hunted down every pyromancer he could find, cutting them down one by one, desperate to stop the wildfire before it was too late. By the time he returned to the throne room, his sword was red and his cloak was stained. Aerys's body still lay where it had fallen. Jaime looked at the Iron Throne, the seat of kings, the throne his family had never been allowed to sit, and he climbed the steps. He sat down, not because he wanted to be king, but because he was tired, because he had just saved 500,000 people and damned himself forever. He chose the city over his vow, and the world would call him Kingslayer. Hours later, Tywin Lannister arrived at the gates of King's Landing with his army. Tywin, who had been Hand of the King for years, who had resigned in anger after Aerys humiliated him at Harrenhal, who had stayed out of the war until now. He sent word to the city that he had come to defend the king, that the Lannisters were loyal, that they would help drive off the rebels. The acting commander of the city's defenses, desperate and terrified, believed him. He ordered the gates opened. It was a mistake. Tywin had not come to defend anyone. He had come to pick the winning side. His forces poured into the city like a flood. They did not march in formation toward the Red Keep to protect the king. They spread out into the streets, looting, killing, burning. It was not a defense. It was a sack. The common folk of King's Landing screamed and ran, trying to hide in their homes, but the Lannister soldiers kicked in doors and dragged people out. They took gold, jewels, anything of value. They killed men who resisted. They did worse to women. The city descended into chaos. This was Tywin's way of proving his loyalty to the rebellion. He would deliver Robert Baratheon a broken city and a dead king, gifts wrapped in blood and fire. His soldiers tore through the streets for hours, and no one could stop them. By the time the worst of it was over, thousands of small folk were dead, their homes destroyed, their lives ruined. And in the Red Keep, Tywin's most brutal men were given a special task. Find the last of the Targaryen line. Find Elia Martell and her children. Tywin wanted them dead. He wanted Robert to see that the Lannisters had done what needed to be done, that they had eliminated the threat to his rule completely. So he sent Sir Rhaegar Targaryen, a monstrous man nearly 8 feet tall, a knight in name only. They called him the Mountain That Rides. He was cruel and savage, loyal only to House Lannister, and he enjoyed his work. With him went Sir Amory Lorch, another brutal knight, and a handful of Lannister men-at-arms. They found Elia Martell in Maegor's Holdfast, the most secure part of the Red Keep, where she had taken refuge with her children. Rhaenys, her daughter, was only 3 years old. Aegon, her son, was a baby, still nursing. Elia held him in her arms, rocking him, singing softly to calm him. She heard the boots in the hallway. She heard the door break open, and she knew. She begged them for mercy, for her children's lives, if not her own. But Rhaegar Targaryen had no mercy. The children were taken from this world before they could know it. Elia Martell's cries were silenced by steel. When it was done, Rhaegar and Amory wrapped the small bodies in crimson Lannister cloaks, hiding what they had done beneath the colour of lions. They carried the bundles to Tywin, and Tywin, cold and calculating, had them brought to Robert Baratheon as a gift. Robert arrived at King's Landing shortly after Tywin. He entered the city as a conqueror, his warhammer still stained with Rhaegar's blood, his bannermen cheering his name. He rode through the streets toward the Red Keep, and the small folk who had survived the sack watched him pass, their faces hollow and broken. Robert did not notice. He was thinking about the throne, about victory, about Lyanna. When he reached the throne room, he found Jaime Lannister sitting on the Iron Throne, alone, his sword across his lap, Aerys's body still cooling on the floor. Robert demanded to know what happened. Jaime told him, flatly, without emotion, the king was going to burn the city. I stopped him. Robert nodded. He did not care about Jaime's vows or his reasons. The Mad King was dead. That was all that mattered. Tywin approached Robert then, his face a mask of calm, and gestured to his men. They brought forward the crimson-wrapped bundles and laid them at Robert's feet. Robert unwrapped them. He saw the small broken bodies of Rhaenys and Aegon. He saw what had been done to them, and he smiled. He called it justice. Dragonspawn, he said. They would have grown up to challenge me, to raise armies, to avenge their father. Better they die now. Eddard Stark was there too. He had arrived with his own forces, hoping to find the city intact, hoping to end the war with some measure of honor. But when Ned looked at those bundles, when he saw the bodies of children wrapped in crimson cloaks, he saw only murder. He confronted Robert. They argued, bitter and loud, their voices echoing through the throne room. Ned said this was not justice. This was butchery. These were children, innocent, no threat to anyone. Robert defended Tywin. He said the children were Targaryen, that their blood made them dangerous. Ned could not bear it. He looked at his oldest friend, the man he had fought beside for over a year, and saw a stranger. He left King's Landing without another word, his heart heavy with disgust. When the smoke cleared, a stag sat on the Iron Throne, but the cost, oh the cost, would haunt the realm for generations. Jaime sat in the throne room after everyone left, still in his white cloak, still called Kingslayer by every person who passed. He chose the city over his vow, and the world would never forgive him. The city was saved. The children were not, and when Ned Stark looked at those crimson-wrapped bodies, he knew this victory would stain them all. But there was one more secret waiting in the south, one more piece of the story that no one knew, and Ned would be the one to find it. While Robert claimed his crown, Ned rode south with 6 companions. Only 2 would return. Eddard Stark did not stay for the coronation. He did not care about the throne or the feasts, or the songs they would sing about the rebellion. His heart was heavy with what he had seen in King's Landing, the murdered children, Robert's smile, the sack of the city. But more than anything, he cared about one thing: Lyanna, his sister. She had not been in King's Landing. She had not been found at the Trident. Rhaegar had hidden her somewhere, and Ned needed to know where. He needed to find her, save her, bring her home. He gathered a small group of loyal men: Howland Reed, the Crannogman from the Neck, who had been at Harrenhal and owed the Starks everything; Lord Willem Dustin, Ethan Glover, who had survived Brandon's ride to King's Landing and been freed after Aerys's death; Sir Mark Ryswell, Martin Castle, Master-at-Arms of Winterfell, and Theo Wool, a mountain clansman. 7 men in total. They rode south into dawn, following rumours and whispers, asking questions in quiet taverns and dusty villages. Where did the prince take the Stark girl? Where is she hidden? Most people did not know. Some lied. But eventually, Ned heard about a tower in the Red Mountains, a place no one visited, guarded by knights in white cloaks. It did not make sense. The war was over. The Kingsguard should have been in King's Landing protecting the king. But the king was dead. So why were Kingsguard still standing guard at a tower in the middle of nowhere? Ned rode toward it, his heart pounding, knowing in his bones that this was where he would find answers. The Tower of Joy. It stood alone on a barren ridge, a round tower of pale stone rising out of the red desert sand. It was simple, unremarkable, the kind of place that should have been empty, but it was not. 3 men stood outside in the heat, dressed in white cloaks despite the dust and sun. 3 of the finest knights who ever lived. Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, wielding Dawn, the legendary blade of House Dane, said to be forged from a fallen star. Sir Oswell Went, a great warrior and loyal knight, and Lord Commander Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, an old man, but still deadly, still devoted to his vows. Ned dismounted. He walked toward them slowly, his men behind him, their hands on their swords. He called out to the 3 knights. He told them the war was over. Rhaegar was dead, killed by Robert at the Trident. Aerys was dead, killed by Jaime in the throne room. The Targaryen cause was lost. There was no more king to protect, no more throne to defend. The Kingsguard could lay down their swords and go home. They had done their duty. But Sir Arthur Dane shook his head. He said they had sworn vows. They said their duty was not finished. They were not guarding a king. They were guarding something else. Someone else, and they would not yield. 3 Kingsguard stood outside a tower in dawn. They would not yield. Ned tried to reason with them. He respected these men, especially Arthur Dane. Arthur was everything a knight should be: honourable, skilled, kind. He was a legend, but Arthur would not move. He drew Dawn, the blade shining in the sunlight, pale as milk glass. Oswell and Gerald drew their swords as well. They stood ready. Ned looked at his 6 companions. 7 against 3. It should have been an easy fight. But these were not ordinary men. These were the best the Kingsguard had ever had. Ned drew his sword. His men did the same, and the fight began. Steel sang. Men fell. Only Howland and Ned remained when the dust settled. The fight was brief, but brutal. Arthur Dane moved like lightning, his blade a blur, cutting down Martin Castle and another man in seconds. Sir Oswell Went fought like a bull, unstoppable, smashing through guards and shields. Lord Commander Gerald held the centre, his experience making up for his age. Ned's men fought bravely, but one by one they fell. Willem Dustin died with a sword through his chest. Ethan Glover fell with his throat cut. Theo Wool and Mark Ryswell were struck down together. It came down to Ned and Howland against the 3 Kingsguard, and even then, it seemed hopeless. Arthur Dane was about to kill Ned. The Sword of the Morning had disarmed him, knocked him to the ground, raised Dawn for the killing blow, but Howland Reed intervened. What he did, no one knows. Some say he used a net, some say he stabbed Arthur from behind, some say he used Crannogman tricks, poison or cunning. Howland never spoke of it, and Ned never told the story in full. But Arthur Dane fell, and with him fell Oswell and Gerald, the greatest knights of their generation, dead in the sand. Ned stood among the bodies of his friends, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Only he and Howland survived. And then he heard it, a sound from inside the tower, a scream, a woman's scream, high and desperate and fading. Ned ran. He took the steps 2 at a time, his heart in his throat. He burst into a room at the top of the tower, and he found her, Lyanna. She lay among roses and blood, her hand reaching for her brother. She was dying. The bed beneath her was soaked red. She had given birth. The child lay beside her, wrapped in a blanket, crying softly. Lyanna's face was pale, her breath shallow and weak. She looked at Ned, and her eyes filled with tears. Not tears of pain, but of relief. He had come. He had found her. She reached for him, and he knelt beside her, taking her hand in his own tears falling. "Promise me, Ned, promise me." She whispered it, her voice barely audible. Ned leaned close, and she told him everything. The baby was Rhaegar's son, their son. She had gone with Rhaegar willingly, though the realm would never believe it. She had loved him, or thought she did, or perhaps it was something else. Something neither of them fully understood. But the baby was innocent. The baby was just a child. And Robert would kill him if he knew. Robert would kill any Targaryen he could find, any threat to his throne. Lyanna made Ned swear. Swear to protect him. Swear to keep him safe. Swear to hide him from the world. To raise him as his own. To never tell anyone the truth. Ned looked at the baby. A boy with dark hair and grey eyes, looking more Stark than Targaryen, and he knew what he had to do. He promised. He swore an oath to his dying sister that he would protect her son, no matter the cost. Lyanna's last words were a whisper, a promise, and Ned Stark carried that secret home. Hidden as his own bastard son, she died in his arms. Ned held her as her breath stopped, as the light left her eyes, as she became still and cold. He stayed there for a long time, kneeling beside her, unable to move, unable to think. His sister was gone, the girl he had tried so hard to save. The reason he had fought this war was dead, and all he had left was a baby and a promise. Howland Reed came up the stairs and found him there. Howland said nothing. He simply helped Ned bury the others. Willem, Ethan, Martin, Theo, Mark, and the 3 Kingsguard. They built cairns in the desert sand, marking the graves with stones. Ned took Arthur Dayne's sword, Dawn, intending to return it to House Dayne at Starfall. It was the honourable thing to do. Then he took Lyanna's body, wrapped carefully, and the baby, and they rode north. Ned stopped at Starfall on the way. He returned Dawn to House Dayne and told them Arthur had died with honour, fighting for what he believed in. Lady Ashara Dayne, Arthur's sister, was there. She was beautiful, kind, heartbroken. Some said she had loved Ned once, or that Ned had loved her. Some said the grief of her brother's death drove her mad. Whatever the truth, not long after Ned left, Ashara Dayne walked to the top of the Palestone Sword, the tallest tower of Starfall, and threw herself into the sea. Her body was never found. Ned carried the weight of that too. He carried so much weight. He rode back to Winterfell with the baby hidden in his cloak. And when he arrived, he told Catelyn, his new wife, Brandon's betrothed, a woman he barely knew, that the boy was his bastard, born of some woman he met during the war. He named the boy Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell. Catelyn hated the boy on sight. She saw Jon as proof of Ned's betrayal, a living reminder that her husband had broken his vows. She never knew the truth. Ned never told her. He never told anyone. He carried that secret like a stone in his chest for the rest of his life. Ned Stark came home to Winterfell a hero and a father. But the boy he brought, the boy he called his bastard, carried a secret that would one day shake the realm to its core. Jon Snow grew up in Winterfell, always aware that he was different, always feeling Catelyn's cold gaze on him. He loved his siblings, Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon, but he knew he was not truly one of them. He was a Snow, not a Stark, and he would never understand why his father, the most honourable man in Westeros, had broken his marriage vows and brought home a bastard. Ned watched Jon grow, seeing Lyanna in his eyes, hearing her voice in his laugh, and he kept his promise. He protected Jon from the world, from Robert, from the truth, even if it cost him Catelyn's love, even if it cost him his honour. Some promises are worth more than anything. The war was over, but peace is just another word for waiting. Robert Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne. He was crowned in a grand ceremony in the ruins of the city, dressed in black and gold, the stag of House Baratheon flying above the Red Keep, where the 3-headed dragon had flown for 300 years. The realm knelt. The great lords came one by one to swear their oaths. Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, Lord Jon Arryn, Warden of the East, Lord Hoster Tully, Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. Even Tywin Lannister came, bringing gifts and words of loyalty, though everyone knew he had waited until the war was won before choosing a side. Robert accepted them all. He was king now, not because he wanted it, but because there was no one else. The Targaryens were gone. Someone had to rule, and Robert had won the throne with his warhammer, so the throne was his. Jon Arryn was named Hand of the King, the man who had started the rebellion by refusing to kill Ned and Robert, the man who had been a father to both of them, would now serve as Robert's chief advisor. Jon accepted the role with quiet dignity. He would spend the rest of his life trying to hold the kingdom together, cleaning up Robert's messes, managing the realm while Robert drank and hunted and mourned the woman he thought he loved. Stannis Baratheon was sent to take Dragonstone, the ancient Targaryen seat in Blackwater Bay. Robert wanted the last of the Targaryen line captured or killed. Stannis, dutiful as always, prepared a fleet and sailed for the island, but he was too late. Queen Rhaella, pregnant and alone, had fled there after the Trident. She gave birth during a massive storm, the worst storm anyone could remember, the kind of storm that seemed summoned by the gods themselves. On Dragonstone, a storm raged. Across the sea, 2 silver-haired children began a long exile. Rhaegar gave birth to a daughter in the midst of the storm. She named the baby Daenerys, born of storm and salt, the last daughter of a dying house. And then Queen Rhaegar died, her strength spent, her body broken by years of suffering and the final labor. Viserys, her son, was barely 8 years old. He was the last prince, the heir to a throne that no longer existed. Loyal men, servants, a few guards who still remembered their oaths, gathered Viserys and baby Daenerys and smuggled them off the island before Stannis arrived. They fled across the narrow sea to the free cities of Essos, where they would live as beggars and exiles, hunted and afraid. Viserys would grow up bitter, obsessed with reclaiming the throne he believed was stolen from him. He would sell his mother's crown to buy food. He would drag his sister from city to city, always one step ahead of Robert's assassins. Daenerys would grow up knowing nothing but exile, never seeing the land her family had ruled, never understanding why the world hated her for a name she did not choose, but they were alive. The Targaryen line was not extinct, and one day, that would matter more than anyone could imagine. Robert married Cersei Lannister shortly after the coronation. It was a political match, arranged by Jon Arryn to bind the powerful Lannister house to the new regime. Tywin wanted his daughter to be queen, and Robert needed Tywin's gold and armies. So they married in a ceremony that was grand and hollow. 2 people who did not love each other, bound together for power and politics. Robert still dreamed of Lyanna every night. He whispered her name in his sleep. Cersei heard it and hated him for it. She had wanted to be queen her whole life, and now that she was, her husband mourned another woman. Their marriage would produce children, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, but those children would carry secrets of their own. Secrets that would one day tear the realm apart, but that is a story for another time. Dawn did not forgive. The murder of Elia Martell and her children left a wound that would never fully heal. Prince Doran Martell, Elia's eldest brother and the ruler of Dawn, kept his rage quiet and hidden. He was a patient man, careful, always thinking years ahead. He did not declare open rebellion. He did not refuse to bend the knee, but he remembered. Dawn remembered. They whispered Elia's name in their halls. They mourned Rhaenys and Aegon in their prayers, and they waited. Oberyn Martell, Doran's younger brother, was less patient. He wanted vengeance. He wanted blood. He traveled the world, learning to fight, to poison, to kill in 100 different ways. He would spend the rest of his life plotting revenge against the Lannisters, against the Mountain, against everyone who had a hand in his sister's death. The seeds of future wars were planted in Dawn's silence. The realm would pay for those seeds one day. Eddard Stark returned to Winterfell and took up his duties as Warden of the North. He married Catelyn Tully and tried to build a life, though the shadow of his sister's death and his secret hung over everything. He raised his children with love and strictness. Robb, the heir, strong and noble. Sansa, beautiful and dreaming of songs. Arya, wild and stubborn. Bran, curious and brave. Rickon, too young to understand. And Jon, always Jon, the boy with grey eyes who looked like Ned, who everyone assumed was his bastard. Catelyn could not bear to look at Jon. She treated him coldly, never cruel, but never kind. The other children loved him, especially Arya and Robb, and Jon loved them back, even as he felt the distance, the wall that separated him from being a true Stark. Ned watched Jon grow and saw Lyanna in every smile, every stubborn moment, every quiet act of courage, and he kept his promise. He never spoke of the Tower of Joy. He never told Jon the truth. The secret weighed on him like a stone, heavier with every passing year. Robert's rebellion ended 3 centuries of Targaryen rule. The dragons were gone. The wheel had turned. But Robert was not happy. He missed the war. He missed the clarity of it, the simple fact of having an enemy to fight, a purpose to wake up for. Peace bored him. He sat on a throne he never wanted, surrounded by people who lied to him or wanted things from him. He grew fat and drunk and restless. He spent money the realm did not have. He held tournaments and feasts, trying to recapture the glory of his youth, but it was never enough. The girl he thought he loved was dead. The war he had won felt hollow, and the throne, the prize he had fought so hard for, was just a chair made of swords, uncomfortable and cold. The realm seemed stable on the surface. The great lords paid their taxes. The small folk worked their fields. The seasons turned. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Old grudges simmered in Dawn. The Greyjoys plotted rebellion in the Iron Islands. The Lannisters grew richer and more powerful. And in the north, a boy named Jon Snow trained with a sword, never knowing that the blood of kings and prophecy ran in his veins. The rebellion had ended the dragons, but the song of ice and fire, the great struggle Rhaegar had seen in his visions, the danger from the north that no one believed in, was still waiting. The White Walkers stirred beyond the wall. The long night was coming, and the prince that was promised, born of salt and smoke, hidden and unknowing, would one day have to face it. But that is a story for another time. The rebellion was won with a warhammer and lost promises. It began with fire at Summerhall and ended with blood at a tower in Dawn. It was a war of love and prophecy, of mad kings and doomed princes, of choices made in anger and promises kept in silence. Thousands died, houses rose and fell, families were destroyed, children were murdered, cities were sacked, and in the end, the realm changed hands, but the questions remained. Was Rhaegar a villain or a dreamer? Was Robert a hero or a brute? Was the rebellion just, or simply another turn of the wheel, another cycle of violence that would beget more violence? History does not give easy answers. It gives us the pieces and asks us to make sense of them. And the pieces of Robert's rebellion are sharp. They cut deep. They shaped everything that came after. Every war in Game of Thrones, every betrayal, every twist of fate can be traced back to this one year when the dragons fell and the stag rose. The Game of Thrones began here, in the ashes of Summerhall, where a king tried to birth dragons and died in fire. In the roses at Harrenhal, beautiful and doomed, placed in a girl's lap by a prince who thought he understood prophecy. In the flames of King's Landing, where 2 Starks burned and a third watched helplessly. In the bells of Stony Sept, where common people protected a lord they barely knew. In the waters of the Trident, where a hammer shattered rubies and ended a dynasty. In the throne room, where a young knight broke his vows to save a city. In a tower in Dawn, where a woman died whispering promises and a baby cried, unknowing and innocent. This was Robert's rebellion, the war that changed everything. Jon Snow would grow up at the Wall, never knowing he was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, never knowing he was the heir to the Iron Throne, never knowing he was the prince that was promised. Daenerys Targaryen would grow up in exile, sold like cattle, abused and afraid, until the day she walked into fire and woke dragons from stone. The Lannisters would scheme and kill and tear the realm apart for power. The Starks would suffer and endure and remember. Dawn would wait for vengeance, and the North, the cold, patient North, would remember everything. Winter was coming. It always was. The White Walkers were stirring beyond the wall. The true enemy. The danger Rhaegar had seen in his visions and tried to prepare for in his own broken way. And when the long night came, when the dead marched south, the realm would need heroes. It would need the prince that was promised. The song of ice and fire. The 3-headed dragon. All of it traced back to Robert's rebellion. All of it began with a choice made at a tournament. A crown of roses, and a mad king's paranoia. So close your eyes now. Let the story settle into your mind like snow falling on stone. Remember the fire at Summerhall that should never have been lit. Remember the boy born in tragedy, haunted by prophecy, who believed he could save the world. Remember the princess from Dawn who loved a distant prince and died for it. Remember the wild northern girl who was crowned with roses and vanished into legend. Remember the wolves who rode south demanding justice and found only fire. Remember the bells ringing in a town where strangers became heroes. Remember the trident running red with rubies, the dragon prince sinking beneath the water, his dreams dying with him. Remember the throne room where a knight chose the city over his king. Remember the tower in the desert where a promise was made in blood and whispers. Remember the exile that began in a storm, 2 children fleeing across the sea, carrying a name that would one day mean dragons and fire and rebirth. This was the real story of Robert's rebellion, not the songs they sing in taverns, not the simplified tales of good and evil, but the messy, complicated truth. A war fought for love and prophecy and madness. A war where heroes did terrible things and villains showed mercy. A war that ended one age and began another, that scattered secrets like seeds across the realm, seeds that would grow into the wars and wonders of Game of Thrones. You know the truth now. Every choice, every battle, every quiet heartbreak that led to the fall of the dragons and the rise of the stag. Every promise kept and every vow broken. Every child born in fire and every child murdered in cold blood. It all mattered. It all led somewhere. And the wheel that crushes the good and the bad alike, the wheel Daenerys would one day try to break, kept turning. Rest now. Let the rebellion fade into the darkness behind your eyes. The war is over. The dragons are gone. The stag sits on the throne, fat and unhappy, and dreaming of a girl who never loved him back. The wolf keeps his secrets in the snow. The lion schemes in gold and crimson. And across the sea, in a world of sun and sand and slaves, a girl with silver hair waits for her moment, unknowing that she will one day hatch dragons and burn the world to remake it. The rebellion ended 300 years of dragon rule, but the song, the great song of ice and fire, of prophecy and doom, of heroes and monsters, has only just begun. Sleep now and dream of crowns and roses, of hammers and swords, of promises whispered in dying breaths. The story goes on, it always does. But for tonight, this chapter is closed, and the North remembers. Winter is coming, and the Game of Thrones never truly ends.